Wim Hof, anybody can do that. My problem with Wim Hof that they say, oh, it's magic and it's kind of unique. You don't need Wim Hof. You don't need to go to the Snishka. It kind of lost its purpose. It just becomes a business. And I don't want to be associated with that.
This is going to make a lot of people angry. You know this, Otto. It's not only what you're saying about Wim Hof, it's also about what you're saying about brown fat.
But brown fat is great in rodents. It's not at all important in humans. So we studied him with functional. We studied him with PET and looked at brown fat. Actually, he didn't have very much brown fat. We had a lot of other people off the street which have made much more brown fat. So brown fat is actually not relevant for Wim Hof at all.
This week's podcast is, well, a little explosive. In it, I am interviewing Otto Music, who is one of the most important neuroscientists in the Wim Hof story. He analyzed Wim Hof's brown fat content. He looked at Wim Hof to explain some of the fundamental properties of the placebo effect. And, well, he has a lot of opinions for where the Wim Hof movement is today, and also how we should really rethink the placebo effect in general and the mind-body connection. It is fascinating, and let's just tune in right now. Otto Music, thank you so much for being on Scott Carney Investigates. I just want to say, when I first met you, a study on Wim Hof had just come out, but honestly, it was way more interesting just to talk to you about the neurology of the brain. And you and Vaibhav were Dawadkar, who is your associate and partner on these scientific things. You guys were instrumental in helping me come up with this idea of a neural symbol. And I just want to thank you for being there at that time. And at this podcast, what we are talking about is how the brain works, how consciousness works, and
how it relates to all these methods like Wim Hof, tumor meditation, and all the thing, because it's always kind of rewarming the same thing from different angles.
exactly. And I think the first question that I had for you, what you're best known for in my tiny circle, and maybe the scientific worlds, they know you for other things, but in my tiny
Mhm,
circle, you are known for studying Wim Hof, putting him in an
mhm.
MRI machine, and figuring out how his brain works. And I just want you to tell me a little bit about that experiment and what came out of it for you.
So, yeah, originally we didn't want to study Wim Hof at all. That was kind of an afterthought. What we tried to do is to study brown fat. I don't know how much you know about brown fat. A few years ago, people thought that when you are exposed to cold, that brown fat, which is here supraclavicular next to the carotid artery, is activated, and it uses obviously calorie because it generates heat. And the NIH thought that this will be a good way, a natural way to lose weight. You exposed to cold, you activate brown fat, you lose weight. Now, it actually, and it was based on studies in rodents where it showed that they lost like 50% of the body weight when you expose them to cold. Now, unfortunately, the rodents are very different, have different evolutionary kind of processes than humans. It turned out that in humans, brown fat is really not important at all, and the amount of calorie you can burn if you have 24 hours, exposed to cold, is something around maybe 20, 30 calories, and a banana has 80 calories,
Wait,
so
wait,
it's
wait.
only the
So,
banana and you are already okay.
Otto, what you're
So
telling me is that brown
mhm.
fat is not what it cracked up to be?
But brown fat is absolutely not. It's great in rodents. It's not at all important in humans. And I mean, if you look at the literature, it was very hot, and a lot of people did rodent studies, and then they kind of transferred it to humans, which was really kind of a problem in thinking. So
This is going to make a
we
lot
did.
of people angry. You know this,
I
Otto,
know,
because
I know, and it was not very popular. And actually, we are not quoted at all in the literature because everybody tries to, get money from the NIH for brown fat studies. And but when you look at the literature, everybody says, well, we showed this in rodents and it's going to be great in humans, but it's actually not. And actually there are good reasons for it. That so the evolutionary pressures for a rodent which has 20 grams,
Hmm.
has essentially no muscle mass, is very different than for a human 70 kilograms, which is a lot of muscle. It's much easier to start shivering, to generate subclinical shivering, to generate heat. So why would you do brown fat? And brown fat is actually only important in neonates. So when a human baby is born, doesn't have any muscle mass. So how they keep
Hmm.
you know
So,
warm, the
so
body
why did
warm,
you
is through
study?
brown fat, but then it declines, and essentially by the time you are an adult, it's completely gone.
So, why did you end up studying Wim Hof?
So in order to activate brown fat, you need to cold exposure, and we were kind of working on some paradigms: cold exposure, put people cold exposure, measuring their calories, and then putting them into PET scanner to measure oxygen consumption and so on, and some MR studies. And somebody mentioned it in passing. It's like, by the way, there is a guy who is very paradoxical response to cold. It's Wim Hof. That's the first time I heard about Wim Hof. And we kind of just said, oh, let's just talk to this guy. And Wim was very, very kind of interested and said, no, no, I'll be in Detroit, in a few months. So I would be happy to come and, kind of do this cold exposure and so on. So we studied him really kind of as an opportunity. But
And
it was never intended like we have a Wim Hof program. It was just,
and what
some
did you
novelty.
find? If you could just summarize very quickly, what did you find when you studied
So
him?
really, what we found was really interesting, that when Wim Hof performed the so we studied him with functional we studied him with PET and looked at brown fat. Actually, he didn't have very much brown fat. We had a lot of other people off the street which have made much more brown fat. So brown fat is actually not relevant for Wim Hof at all. But then we put him in a functional MRI scanner, and we had this paradigm where we have 5 minutes cold exposure, 5 minutes neutral cold exposure, and kind of looked at what are the regulatory mechanism in the brain when you expose the person to cold and then you warm him up again. And what we found is very interesting, that it was in the periequilateral gray, which is in the brainstem, which is a relatively important structure in the upper brainstem, which does a lot of things. So it works with the hypothalamus to set processes in motion, like cardiovascular, the uh, vasoconstriction and so on. But it also has some motivational aspects. And also, what it does is it suppresses pain. So pain, or when you are uncomfortable from cold, it actually suppresses that by
Mhm.
by releasing cannabinoids and opioids. And what we saw, it was very interesting that we saw when he actually performed his breathing and meditation, that we saw a uh, really high increase of blood flow. fMRI is just blood flow in this periaqueductal gray. And then we kind of starting thinking about what this all means. And we thought it's a stress-induced analgesia. That if you and what stress-induced analgesia is, that if you are in a stress situation and then you get a second stressor, then the first, basically you don't feel the second stressor. So you run away from a tiger, you're in a stress situation, you sprain your ankle, you don't feel the ankle,
Mhm.
because
Right,
that's
because you
stress
you
induced
have a tiger
analgesia,
to
and
worry about.
it's
Right.
it's um, it's mediated by the periaqueductal gray by releasing cannabinoids and opioids. So
Okay.
kind of that was interesting. That's why we started to think more about this mechanism,
s-
regulatory mechanism in the brain.
So what you're saying then, I mean, Wim Hof does have cold tolerance in and above
Hmm.
your average Joe off the street. I have cold tolerance in and above the average Joe off the street because I do ice baths regularly. I do
Hmm.
exposure. Um, is there, are we generating more heat, and are there mechanisms behind that that
So that goes directly to the to what we want to talk about the brain. The brain is essentially a regulatory organ. It
Mhm,
regulates the body. That's the purpose. Like the heart is a pump, complicated pump, just pumps blood, and there are a lot of parameters, but it's a pump. A kidney is a filter. It filters blood. There's a lot of other things, but it's a filter. The brain is a regulatory organ. So how does it regulate the body? It regulates it reactively and predictively. So that means reactively is you get exposed to cold. It's sensed that there are sensory organs which sense, oh, the temperature is dropping, core temperature is dropping. So the sympathetics, and there's a sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system, autonomic system, they actually initiate some action. In that case, vasoconstriction, that move the blood into the thing, you don't radiate that much heat.
mhm.
But also what it does is through the periaquical gray is that you generate a trigger for action. So making fire, taking shelter, and so on. And this actually relates. So a reactive response to a challenge is internal, which is the hypothalamus. It's cardiovascular vasoconstriction, so and trigger for action. So the cold, the feeling of cold is actually a trigger. So you actually respond to it by performing an action.
So, if you've been following me for a little while, you know that I wrote this book called The Wedge, and auto music was really, really important for how I ended up conceiving of the idea of neuro symbols. If you want to find out more, I would love you to pick up a copy, and there's a link down there in the description. All right, without further ado, back to our interview. Let me understand this. So what you're saying, I think, is
Hmm.
that when I jump into the cold water and I control
Hmm.
myself in that water, that I'm not actually heating myself up at all. I'm just sort of like not worrying about getting colder. Is that right? There's not
So
actually heating mechanism.
so so there are several aspects. Let me kind of rephrase that. So the brain regulates the body reactively, so we suspect about its internal and external response triggering an action or just doing something in the body. And predictive means that you and which is a much better way to regulate the body, because you want to know that it's going to be cold, so then you take some actions right now which prevents you to actually being cold. So
Mhm.
if you have a correct predictive model, which you need to now simulate, and that's actually consciousness, and that's basically where we're going with it. But if you can simulate that tomorrow it's going to be cold, then you take an action today that you actually get firewood, or buy a jacket or
Sure.
whatever, which actually preempts your reactive response. So you not even need a reactive response, which is actually much more efficient, because a reactive response, you
Sure.
already needed to move the body away from the optimum, and then actually you kind of put it back by performing an action,
But
making
I,
fire
I
or
guess
vasoconstriction and
I
so on.
guess I'm not understanding you, or maybe I
Hmm.
am understanding you
Hmm.
here, which is that in the ice water, when you're
Hmm.
actually in that condition and you're relaxed in it, are you saying that you have no biological mechanism to heat yourself when that
So
happens? There's nothing there, because
So
we used to
the,
say,
the, the first question is, why would you voluntarily go into an ice bath? That's
yeah,
actually what you should, because evolutionary that actually makes no sense. So you move your body, so you have an ideal physiological state, which
mhm,
is your 37
homeostasis.
degrees Celsius,
Yeah,
and now you put in a ice water. Why would you do that? And why? The answer is that you say, and this is actually comes into this what we call hormetic stressors, that so the body, this reactive response of the body, has mechanisms which are mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. Again, cardiovascular, vasoconstriction,
right.
maybe activation of brown fat.
Sure.
Now, if you now have controls deviation, so you like exercise, Exercise is a controlled deviation from the optimum, because the more you practice your recovery mechanism, which
Mm-hmm.
is really the sympathetic nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
the better you're going to be in the future when you think. So when you go into the cold, what you do is they say, okay, I know this is actually makes no sense right now, but by exercising my thermoregulatory system, I'm going to be better off when I actually need it. And that's the same thing with exercise, with temperature, with fasting. Why would we fast? Makes no sense. You need nutrition. But you say, okay, eventually I'm going to be hungry one day. So if I really now exercise fasting, intermittent fasting, in order to uh, exercise this mechanism of digestive system to deal with uh, times of scarcity, then I'm going to be better off in the future. But here, and that's actually kind of the issue which I think is most important, that the reactive and predictive regulation work against each other. So in plain English, you lay in the bed, you are absolutely comfortable, and say, hey, that's great. Your brainstem says, perfect, this is a perfect physiological state, don't do anything. But now your predictive system say, well, that's true, but if I don't go out of my bed, I'm going to lose my job, so maybe in 3 months I'm not going to be able to pay the rent, and I'm not going to have a bed. So you get up. Now you get up and your brain says, what you doing? You were just comfortable, this is perfect. Now you're cold, you have headache, it's raining, why are you getting up? And that's actually where we coming back, that the reactive and predictive system,
It sounds
by
like you're
setting
talking,
an action in order to,
but it sounds
Mhm.
like you're not talking about it sounds like you're talking about motivation in various ways, right? Like, and the way that your brain, um,
Well, motivation is just the kind of how do you exercise it, but the driving force is the regulation of your body. So again, I'm coming back that your brain is regulates the body reactively and predictively. That's kind of the mantra,
no, I get
and
that,
everything
but
flows
you're
from
either
there.
speaking past me or we're just not
Hmm.
connecting on this
Hmm.
question. And my question is, I think, is very simple. And I think I think you're going into like the default mode network here, and you're going to some fascinating things. Yeah. So when a person jumps into ice water, if we
Hmm.
want to look at sort of the old Nazi experiments, right, where they put
Hmm.
Jews in the
Hmm.
Holocaust and they froze them to death in water and they measured how
Hmm.
long they lasted, and there were some very serious both ethical and scientific problems with those studies,
Sure. Yeah.
but people didn't last all that long. Now, someone like me who's been training, someone like Wim, you can stay in the ice bath for, I've done a half an hour at 32
Yeah.
degrees. I know people who've done 2 hours at that temperature. Are
Because you
they
exercised your regulatory system, you exercised your sympathetic nervous system. The more you do it, the better your recovery mechanism is going to be. So if you do this for a long time, then you're going to be much more resistant, and that's actually where Wim Hof is.
so what you're saying is that the sympathetic nervous system will generate heat somehow. How will it do that?
Yes, I mean it will generate heat by shivering,
But you don't
by
shiver.
vasoconstriction,
But you don't shiver.
and no, it's subclinical shivering. You think you don't shiver, but your muscle is shivering. It's subclinical shivering. It's not like this here. It's your muscles are more actually more activated. So if you put a electrical thing, you will see that your muscles have subclinical shivering. You have to. That's the only way how your body generates heat.
So you're saying that when I'm in the ice water and I'm relaxed and I don't feel myself shivering, you're saying I'm still
Yes,
shivering. I just don't
yes.
notice it.
Subclinical on a subclinical level, yes, you do.
Great. Awesome.
I mean, there's no other
Mystery
way. I mean, there is
solved.
no miracle, right?
Otto, mystery solved. Subclinical shivering. Great. In What Doesn't Kill Us, I wrote that the science on brown fat was suspicious to me. I mean, I talked about brown fat
Uh-huh.
because we talked about the heavy mouse and the
Mhm.
the the thin mouse. But it did seem to me that there's a mechanism by which you are able to heat yourself in ice water because I had experienced that.
Well,
And
it's not brown fat in humans.
yeah,
That's
it's
I
just
tell
some
you.
other mechanism, metabolism, brown fat,
It's
something.
subclinical shivering. That's
Mhm.
actually what it is.
There's a guy named Andrew Huberman who's a famous
Mhm.
neuroscientist out of Stanford, and he said that when you take an ice bath, that the best way to lose weight was to shiver, to induce shivering yourself, and to fidget. He said fidgeting was very useful.
Well, every motion, that's the principle of exercise. You
Mhm,
know, I mean, it's kind of a different way of exercise. You're
mhm,
moving your body every time you use your muscles. Energy, ATP gets used up. So
yeah.
by definition, it has to have an impact on your metabolism, energy metabolism.
So you did this study, and Wim cites your study all the time. It's
Mhm.
actually, I was looking at this today. You're mentioned in his autobiography that, you know, and you're a big deal in the Wim Hof community, Otto. I don't know if you know this.
I want to stay away from the community, because the more you are part of the thing, the more you try to please people. So, the more you stay away from fame, the better you will be, and the more objective you will be.
And that is something that we need to talk about.
Mhm.
I was going to ask you about how that
Mhm.
study predicts the placebo effect and helps explain the placebo effect, but we can also go into
Yeah.
the question of.
So that's all kind of related, and we can
Mhm,
talk about this. It's you see, all these terms are kind of very related, and once you have the correct framework, it's actually they kind of naturally follow from there. So again, kind of basically what I kind of leading into where we're going with it. So if you have if you have a predictive regulation, by definition, you have to have a simulation system. You have to have something where you now simulate, which is just in your head, a simulation which doesn't really happen in real life.
mhm.
So okay, once you recognize that you need to have a simulation, then that's actually kind of going into the network where we have, in order to have a simulation, you have to symbolic representation of something on the table of water, of and so on, of cold, symbolic representation, and then you put them together and simulate what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Now, that's really important, because people get confused between the physical world and the predictive simulative world. So the physical world is cause and effect. There is no purpose, no meaning. It's cause and effect. It's deterministic. One thing gives the other. It's a domino effect. But in your simulation, in your thing, there is now, you can now define in your simulation, in your predictive system, which we can talk about, is now something which is called meaning or purpose,
Right.
because you set an action, because you simulate that you want to eventually, I don't know, go to the Kilimanjaro. So it's like, if I want to go to Kilimanjaro in my shorts, then I need to do this, and to do this I need to do something else, till it loops back to today, to right now. And now you set an action, and in your simulation this action has a purpose, that eventually you're going to be the thing. But in the real world, this doesn't exist. In the real world, you just do one thing after the other, and there is no purpose. So which is important to me, that people understand that you have a physical world and a simulation predictive world.
Mhm.
And 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 a lot of these terms like motivation, purpose, and so on, are only defined in the
But
virtual, in the simulation
but
world.
the simulate, and I talk about this stuff all the time in my
Mhm.
podcast. And I love the fact that you're using the word simulation, because usually when people in the pop culture right now say we all live in a simulation, they're saying we all live in a computer. But what you're saying is more right, which is that our brain creates a simulation of the world around us through our senses, and then
And that's your
as a
cognitive apparatus.
right
That's
and
the cognition. That's actually what cognition is. The cognition is just a different word for your simulation, because cognition has symbols and a way how to connect symbols
Mhm.
together in order to predict what's going to happen.
But you're also saying, I believe,
Mhm.
Otto, that you're saying that those simulations that we create in our brains
Mhm.
affect the way our bodies respond and help with the placebo effect. So if I'm sick,
Obviously, they have to, because that's the point. That's the point. It's a predictive regulation. I mean, if you make, why do we have the simulation? The simulation, in order to regulate the body, right now and in future. So, the meaning of life from
Yeah.
a neuroscience point of view is have to the optimal physiological state right now and in future.
So how
And
does
in
that?
order to do that, you have to, so the simulation needs to actually loop back eventually, because you see the simulation is only important, or simulations are only good for that you predict what actually you're going to set right now. So the simulation which you simulate something and has no effect on today, it's meaningless,
Mhm.
because, so again, and I
But
think
how
this
does
is
it
a very
move?
important point that you understand, that a simulation is only as good as it informs you what action to take right now in this moment, so you eventually come to
But
some goal.
but it seems like there's more to it than that. Just using your own language and just using the way you're
Hmm.
speaking about it is that it's not only an action you take, such as gathering firewood to heat yourself up, it's
Hmm.
also saying, look, I'm going to jump into that ice bath and my body needs to be able to survive it. And therefore, there are unconscious processes going on in your body to let you deal with that ice bath. You just can't think about them. You just don't know. You don't think to yourself, let's do some
But
micro shivers.
so
Let's
so
go
that's
activate.
no. So again, so this kind of what people get confused. So you have the regulation, reactive, predictive. And
Mhm,
then you have two ways how to accomplish it. One is using symbols.
mhm.
So this is predictive. And one is using, emotions, or the what we call unconscious. But what is unconscious is that it's not symbol based. So we loop everything which is not symbol based. So like hunger. If you are hungry, and don't actually express it in a sentence like "I'm hungry," that was unconscious or non-symbolic representation,
Mhm.
and still things happening, because now, you know it kind of motivates you to do something, and without really kind of cognitively or symbolically processing it. So let me actually go back. What is the brainstem doing? The brainstem is the lowest level. The brainstem, and there are several, the parabrachial nucleus, the periaqueduct, hypothalamus, generates a image of the body which has two axes. The energy, so arousal, we call it arousal and valence. So the on the y-axis you have how much energy do I have on my disposal, and on the x-axis is how far am I away from the optimum. So if you have a lot of, and so it constantly generates that. Now, okay, so what happens now when you move away from the optimum? It depends on if you have a lot of energy, or if you have little energy. Now, if you have, let's assume you have a lot of energy and you move away, you are kind of, highly motivated, doing things, working out, and so on. If you have low energy and move away, then you might get depressed. So, what I'm trying to say is that the brainstem generates a map of your current state of the body, and your periaqueduct brain now says, okay, giving where I am in this space, how much energy I have, and how far away I am from the optimum, generates, which we call, motivational drives, but it's, well, action triggers, which are emotions that you see. I'm hungry. Hungry means, okay, I don't have enough glucose, so you now move the way to eat, or or temperature, or physical integrity. you know Pain. What is pain? Pain actually tells you moved away, your physical integrity is compromised, so there is a certain reaction to it, that now you move your hand away, you run away, whatever. So that's the first level. This is the first level, which is non-symbolic. It's just kind of, and it works by generating emotions, just the thing. Now the first level of prediction is what we call the conditioning, that you have the hippocampus, which kind of remembers certain things, and says, okay, if, but it's very simple. It have a very simple structure, that it's only if this then that. So it kind of follows the structure of the world, kind of this deterministic. You know, Pavlov's dog. If the bell, then I get food. It's
Hmm.
kind of very simple correlation.
Yeah, Otto, it's
And
super.
actually,
It's
Mhm,
fascinating listening to you use these words because my background is in
mhm,
anthropology. You know, I got to
mhm,
my dissertation
mhm,
for the PhD, and then I dropped out to do journalism. But we also in anthropology talk about symbols. We also talk
mhm,
about energy expenditure in terms of culture and
mhm,
deterministic factors and non-deterministic factors. And it's it's interesting that neuroscience is using similar ideas that anthropologists have oftentimes realized that they don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to symbols, when it comes to what energy really is and how people actually operate. We have these deterministic ideas of how cultures work. You know, one
mhm,
idea in the 50s was that a culture would always you, optimally use the resources of its environment, and it would be and the culture would be deterministic by using its optimal resources. So a coastal living
mhm,
tribe would get all the mollusks before it went for pine nuts. You know, that's a sort of
mhm.
that's Solins and that sort of. It turns out that's totally wrong. It turns out that humans act in totally weird and unpredictable ways, and culture sort of forms in unusual places. So when I hear you use the word symbol,
Mhm,
when I hear you use the word, we have accesses and we have optimal ways that humans work, I think to myself,
mhm,
maybe neuroscientists don't know what they're talking about, because you've obviously
mhm.
created a heuristic that is very much within the deterministic model, which is what anthropologists were doing in the 50s before the anthropologists were like, oh man, and they ended up in the
But you see, the
postmodern.
problem with anthropology that they're kind of always in the simulation space. They are, you eventually need to see how it's implemented in your regulatory system. And that's actually, I think, is the strength of neuroscience, that
Mhm.
we say, okay, you can have any idea you want because you're in simulation space. You can simulate whatever you want. Fantasy is actually
Sure.
you can
Hmm.
simulate. That's the advantage and disadvantage of
Right.
a simulation, that you can have pigs that fly. They never exist, but you can have it in your
But
simulation.
the
So
neuroscience doesn't work,
so,
doesn't operate outside of culture,
mm,
right? So your brain is doing all these simulations in a real world that's out there, right? And it's interacting with other brains in a cultural medium. And
sure.
we cannot say that a brain exists on its own, right? That's one way to look at it, right? We can say, here's the brain stem and here's how sensation moves from the outside world. But these simulations are also based on the simulations of other people and collective
No,
imagination
no,
and
you need to
collective
react to the other
symbols.
people. And actually, these are so what are the motivational drives? It's food, energy and nutrition. It's sex, reproduction. It's physical integrity, that pain, and it's social status. Why social status? And that's actually where we're coming with anthropology, we're just studying. Why social status important? Why do people buy expensive clothes and things?
Right.
Because it's because society, or if you put people together, if people collaborate,
Yeah.
they generated added value, added resources. And
You're
if you
so
have social
you're
status,
so
you get a
1950s. I love
disproportionate
it.
share of resources.
It's like talking to Marshall Solins. It seems like you're in my favorite era of anthropology, because anthropology was really useful in that
Mhm,
time period. This is when anthropologists would be on verandas drinking gin and tonics. It was the most fun period of anthropology, and I
mhm.
agree with you that because it made sense. But the problem is that humans ended up being more complex than we wanted them to be in our simplified models, and irrational actors as well. And when we tried to make
Why are human irrational? People want to have food, they want sex, they want to have comfort, they want to have high social status, and they want to explore. Because the thing, that's basically, tell me a situation where this doesn't apply. This is basically, you can reduce. I mean, reduce. There are shades, but essentially these are the motivation drives, because these drive you towards you know physiological optimum. If you have a high social status, then you get disproportional resources from the added value. It's advantageous for you, and that's why people you know have expensive stuff,
there
right?
is so much to talk to you about here, and I would totally nerd out with you on this particular point for a long time. I would say I just but I think our listeners may go somewhere else. I would recommend David Graeber's new book about the unfolding of human evolution, which touches on these points, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But let's move on and leave this here for now because I don't think we're going to resolve the neuroscience anthropology uh, discussion anytime soon. I will say is that so you're so important in the Wim Hof community, in the cold community that you're written in his book. I've written a book about Wim Hof, and as you know, as I've talked to you about, I am in the process of releasing a new video about real problems with Wim Hof, especially with him becoming more famous and saying more and more irrational things, and a number of deaths associated with the Wim Hof method. Um,
But that's exactly, Wim Hof exactly supports what I'm just saying. That, basically, why is Wim Hof now getting more and more, why is he addicted to fame? Because it increases his social status. So, now he can disproportional resources. He can travel. People give him free stuff. People kind of bow down to him. So this is exactly social status is important because, and that's actually, and this is the problem, that if you don't recognize that one of the motivation drives is social status, you will be surprised that each of the gurus, and Wim Hof is one of them, eventually kind of sells out. You have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of follow your motivational drive, which is social status, which is a very important motivational drive, which is actually, and that's my point, it's actually really hard coded into your brainstem. It's not like, people make this up or you need the consciousness. Even on subconscious level, you already want to have high social status. And if
mhm.
you take a group of 10 people together, eventually a structure is going to emerge automatically
Yeah,
without anybody planning it or thinking about it, or symbolically representing it, or scheming. So that's and so basically, with respect to Wim Hof, once you get, and that's actually kind of, I think, the problem, once you make this a business, where a business model that you need to succeed in a business, you want social status because your social status gives you directly advantage in your business. That means money and fame and influence. So I think it's impossible for humans to not do this if they make this as their um, kind of the means of living. You see, if Wim would have to do something else, he had another job and does this on the side, he probably wouldn't develop like that. But because that's his full-time job, he has inevitable. And actually, so does many other gurus. He's not alone.
And this
So
is
you have to be careful with. I think that the more you one tries to be important, the less one is objective. That's unfortunately related to our drive for social status.
and is this why you don't want to work with him anymore? This is what you told me the other day.
Well, I disagree with the business model. So, Wim Hof went into this that, I want to help people. I went through a tough time, and, I came up with a method which we can, it's a method. It's kind of a variation of Jitumo meditation and things people did many times in different variations. And it's fine. And he said, okay, I want to help people. That's great, just do it. But once it becomes now a business where they have uh, luxury hotels in Poland, where and Wim not even shows up anymore and doesn't really try to motivate people, then it kind of lost its purpose. It just becomes a business, and I don't want to be associated with that.
Um, I mean, I've gone through a very similar journey as you have. It's interesting that we've done it separately and are able to talk about it now. When you said when I look at your paper on Wim Hof and we
Mhm.
talk about how the placebo effect
Mhm.
works, um, Wim Hof touts your study as proving that his method is the key to the placebo effect. How do you
No,
respond to
it's
this?
nonsense, really. So how placebo essentially now? So the so now we're coming into the simulation. We can talk about this, the network, the salience network, the default mode network, and the central executive network, which do different things, and we can talk about them. So once you have simulations, so you make a simulation, and then you predict something happening, and if your prediction is correct, you get rewarded. Obviously, this makes sense evolutionary, because why would you want to have a simulation that it's not true? That's it's actually it's worse than having no simulation. So your brain or your reward system rewards you if your simulation is confirmed, and that's kind of the
Mhm.
basis of
Sure.
motivational reasoning.
Mhm.
Now, where is this placebo effect come in? Now, in the real world, it's not black and white. So essentially, you make a simulation, and then something happens, and there is a wiggle room. You can interpret it in many different ways, right? You can interpret, oh, this is what I didn't express it exactly the way, but this is actually what I meant or not. So, your placebo effect means that you make a prediction, you get a sensation back, which is difficult to interpret, but you interpret it in a way which confirms to your simulation,
Mhm.
because it's inconclusive. Essentially, the information is inconclusive. Now, but this now confirms, gives you a dopamine release in your nucleus accumbens, and now you actually say, oh no, this is really true. So you actually believe it, and your lower level networks kind of go along, because they say, well, that's really true. So you kind of influence your lower level networks by making this prediction, making the being rewarded, interpreting it in a certain way, and by interpreting it in this way, you now so let me maybe I need to rephrase it, because this is important point, and I kind of didn't say it in the correct. So all these systems, these non-symbolic and symbolic, they always run in parallel. You see, you don't have like, oh, just the non-symbolic, no, only the emotion, only the thing. They all run in parallel, and they as we talked about, they need to suppress each other.
Mhm.
So that means that if you're interpreting something in a certain way, which is, you are in the forest, in the darkness, and your kind of unconscious or non-symbolic brains, they say, oh, this is danger, this is danger, this is the thing. So you're starting getting afraid. But if you now see something symbolically and say, no, no, I interpret it as a shadow or whatever, this interpretation now suppresses your non-symbolic thing. So it's going both ways mutually. These systems, the reactive, predictive, symbolic, non-symbolic, they always suppress each other, and that's actually the basic
But
of the placebo effect.
so is does the placebo effect in your mind and the way you're describing it,
Uh-huh.
it sounds like to me that you're sort of saying the placebo effect is all in your head. So so when
Absolutely, it's in your head, but you're in your head. But you see, when you say in the head, the brain is a regulatory organ which regulates the body. So if your regulatory system regulates the body in a certain way, it actually has an effect on the body. That's actually the problem, that people think it's in your head. The brain is a regulatory organ which regulates the body. So whatever happens in the regulatory organ affects actually the body. It's kind of the same thing. You see, that's my problem, that people always say it's on your head. Yeah, it's in the regulatory system which regulates the body. So now I'm convinced that something happens, I'm regulating my body in a different way. So obviously it will have an effect on your body.
So yes, so then when we talked about the difference between the material world and the
Hmm.
simulation,
And
if you have
mhm,
an underlying condition that is a medical problem, such
mhm.
as we can throw in an autoimmune illness or you can throw in cancer. I
Yeah.
don't care,
Mhm,
whatever you want. And then you placebo that up with your predictive modeling, and maybe it's the power of positive thinking, whatever it is that you have to do to get into that placebo mindset.
mhm.
Does that have clinical healing power?
Absolutely. So basically we know that, and so you go to the doctor and they show you, oh, I was in Harvard, shows you kind of the thing.
Mhm,
Now you actually convinced, oh, whatever this guy's legit.
mhm,
So if they give you a sugar pill and say this is going to help you because I studied this for 20 years, okay, now you say, hey, that, you know, look at that, the guy's a accomplished person. So now every feedback from your body, now you interpret very different, you know.
mhm,
So now you have like some sensation in your body, and before you would say, oh, you know, this is pain and this is bad, and I said, no, no, now this is different because you
mhm.
interpret it different. And because you interpret it different mechanism in your brain stem are set in motion. That's kind of the important thing. And that's what placebo effect we call psychosocial stimulation.
What is the best way if I'm going to make the best placebo, right? If I'm
Hmm.
going to make a placebo factory and
Hmm.
create something which optimizes the exact processes that you're talking about,
Hmm.
how would I go about doing it?
So the most important is that the people believe in it. So that their simulation really is really, so the belief, and that's why, you know, all these people like Wim Hof, they need to have kind of this aura of, you know, they are special, because that's actually, it's like the guy who puts the Harvard, or, I mean, he might have gone to Harvard or not, or might be complete, it really doesn't matter. It only matters what you actually believe, how you actually set up your simulation.
Hmm.
So so this is, you know, really the point, that convincing you that this is actually, that your the breathing and the cold exposure is going to help you. That's actually the more, I mean, what is cognitive behavioral therapy?
Hmm.
I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's only that, you know, the psychotherapist puts you in a situation where you have to succeed,
Hmm.
and then makes you believe that it's based on the breathing or based on the amulet he gave you. So it's so again, the placebo effect is important because it's placebo effect is kind of, you know, derogative. If we, psychosocial stimulation is a better way, that psychologically you generate in the other person a prediction or a simulation model, which now going to interpret sensation from the body in a way you want
Yeah.
them to interpret,
What
like
would
that helps you, it decreases pain or whatever.
Sure. So what you're saying is that the brain creates this simulation. You have an idea for where you want to be.
Mhm.
You have a firm belief in that, and somehow your body, because you're sending the right signals to your body, um, figures out a way to optimally
No,
achieve
but
that goal.
this, for example, you go into an ice bath,
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But if you say, hey, this is going to help me, you know, 2 weeks from now, then you actually interpret the pain very differently.
Right.
Then we say,
Mhm.
hey, I'm going to be here for hours and nobody's going to help me and I'm going to die. Why is that? It's
Mhm.
basically the same sensation,
Mhm.
but it's a different simulation, because now you say, oh, I have control over it, I can get all anytime I want.
Mhm.
But in the real world, it's still the same sensation. Then nothing changed with your sensation. Your temperature is going down, but your interpretation of the sensation is very different. And that's actually makes it now, that's actually generates, because, for example, you say, no, no, you know, it really hurts like hell, but this is good for me because I'm closer to my goal on, I don't know, going to Kilimanjaro in my show. So now you get rewarded because now you're closer to your eventual goal,
Well,
which is
it's not only
again,
you being rewarded, it's all of the cells in your body also being rewarded, right? It's also all
well,
of those semi-conscious and unconscious processes also
well,
receiving
the cells
dopamine
are
and
actually not rewarded. What's going to happen is that your sympathetic nervous system, which actually tries to bring your body back
Mhm.
to the optimum. So the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, essentially is just the execution mechanism which makes sure that if your body goes away from the optimum, physiological optimum, it brings it back. And now all these things, what we're doing with G2, with the thing, is that we exercising this mechanism, and now we're interpreting it differently.
Where
So
are the limits to the placebo possibilities, right? Because obviously, there's placebo has a certain range where it can work, right? You know,
mhm.
I feel a little muggy today. Maybe my bowels are out of it. Maybe you can placebo that out, but I can't do it for a gunshot wound, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
not
sure.
really, right? So how would we demarcate the territory of the placebo effect? Would you say?
Well, it's the more the more you use it, the better you get into it, and the more extensive it's going to be. So at the beginning, it's like with exercise. You run for 5 minutes. If you never run before, you're exhausted. After you do this for 6 months, you're going to be much better, and then you can push these things. So the more you exercise it, the more you're going to be. And obviously there is a physiological limit. If I cut off your hand, no simulation is going to help you,
Mhm.
but you can go pretty far. And actually that's what's happening. I mean, if you look, why do people, I mean, people put so much onto them, I don't know, explorers, why do they go to the North Pole? They freeze, they hungry. Why do they do this? Because they think, say, first of all, exploration, that they try to uncover hidden rewards, and secondly, social status. They say, hey, I'm freezing right now, but I'm going to be famous, and a lot of women are going to want to have sex with me, or whatever it is. So your simulation is that this gets you closer to eventually the goal of higher social status, and that's actually why you don't feel the pain as much as you do. So you can call it placebo effect, or you can call it a suppression, that you have a plan that you're gonna do this feat. You're gonna go
Sure.
to the North Pole barefoot and in shorts. Why you do it? Because you're gonna be famous, and then
Yeah.
you get all these rewards.
So
So
you're seeing 3 levels here. When you're describing this, there's the neurological, there's the brain and its nerves that shoot out to the body, right? There's
mhm,
your projection of how the world, how you want it to be, your fantasy
mhm,
of getting all the women because you went to the North Pole. And then you also have, and I think this is really important, and I don't think we've been able to quite
mhm,
point at it, but you also have the physiological responses in the body that are below that, right? That you may say, "Hey, I want to go be a North Pole explorer." And that happens in the words in your brain, right? The words in your brain say, "Hey,
mhm,
I want to be a North Pole explorer." But your body also is like, "Well, to do that, to get to my optimal crosshatch of energy versus what was the other
mhm.
axis you had? The energy
Yeah,
versus
yeah, the
uh,
deviation from physiological
right,
optimum.
to homeostasis, right? Then what's happening is that your body is responding to the ideal that you have, right? To the dream or to the desire. Your body is changing in relation to that. Which
Yes.
how does that make you different from Tony Robbins and the power of positive thinking?
No, it's basically we're talking all about the same thing. I
Yeah,
mean, the only thing which I'm telling you is how it's actually executed in the brainstem, and in the limbic system, and in the cortical system. But and that's actually my problem with Wim Hof, that they say, oh, it's magic, and it's kind of unique. No, we're always talking about the same thing in
mhm,
different variations. It's always about a regular system, which is reactive, predictive, symbolic, non-symbolic. And now you kind of do different variation on this, but this is actually what is happening. And so Wim Hof, anybody can do that. You
yeah,
don't need Wim Hof. You don't need to go
yeah,
to the Snishka. Once you understand that, say, okay, if I'm gonna, and we can talk about the Wim Hof, about this breathing and the
yeah,
thing. It's kind of all natural physiological kind of processes in the body. The tingling because your CO2 is now lower, and so on. The stress-induced analgesia, the kind of meditation. What he called meditation is more like a prediction about something where you interpret then signals from your body in the different ways, which set different
Right.
uh, sympathetic responses in motion, which kind of are different than they would.
Yeah. So it sounds like to answer my question from earlier, which is I also talk about this in the Wedge, as you are aware, to make the best placebo, right? If we're gonna to package up the best placebo, what we need are the strongest sensations, and sensations. I'm saying that very broadly. These could be emotional sensations, and these could be physical sensations. It could be a lot of things, and then a firm belief that you
The
can
belief is the
change.
most important. Actually,
No, but it needs
placebo
to be
effect
both.
is
But Otto, it needs to be both because it needs to be something that's visceral to you. That's like, there's a thing. And then your belief needs to interact with that sensation, whether it's an
well,
emotion.
but you see, the sensation is always the same thing. It's like, Nietzsche said, there is no truth on the interpretation. No matter what things happen, but you interpret it in a different way. It's actually has a different kind of consequences in your simulation. In the placebo effect, you can think that you always will gonna get the same sensation. But if you have a belief or a certain simulation or a way to interpret the sensation, it's gonna set different recovery mechanism in.
Well, Otto, I'm going to push on you here a little bit because I think the volume of the sensation is very salient to this
No,
question.
no. I mean,
And so like,
there are limits. Again, I'm saying that you see, the more you practice this recovery mechanism, the more you're gonna have a leeway.
mhm,
Obviously, if you're starting out, you don't have very much.
mhm,
But the more once you because your recovery mechanisms are going to be much more efficient, they're going to be
mhm,
much stronger, and so on. So you get much further. So you can actually get for your placebo effect or your simulation actually much more bang for your buck.
mhm,
So, and that's why do people do exercise? Why do they fasting? Why do they cold exposure? Because they train their recovery. Actually, they train the sympathetic nervous system to recover them back from once you move the body out of
mhm,
physiological optimum back together. And the more you do it, the better it's gonna be, and the faster it's going, and the less you're gonna be affected by it.
right.
And that's, you
Mhm,
see it on yourself. At the
mhm,
beginning, when you went into the ice bath, you were freezing. You do it for a year, it's nothing. Why?
mhm,
Because now your sympathetic nervous system is much better in,
yeah.
once you get into the cold, shutting down
Mhm,
basically the blood flow to your organs, keeping the thing,
mhm,
uh, uh, kind of releasing cannabinoids in your periaqueduct gray that decreases the pain perception because you've done this many times. They kind of.
well, it actually happens much quicker than that. You gain the resilience in a matter of 2 days, with it. But the interesting thing here is that I don't think you can do it with just anything. Like, I don't think I could have a fantastic North Pole, placebo response by eating bananas, right? I can't look at a banana and be like, "This is going." No matter how much belief I do put into that banana, I don't think I can have it. I think it needs to be
No, no,
something which is
because you see, but
challenging.
what you say is that the belief or the simulation needs to be reasonable. You see, if I give you a banana, say you're gonna be nothing, you're not gonna believe it. You can
Yeah,
say whatever you want, but in your core, in your simulations, that makes no sense. So you actually don't believe it. So you need to something which you really believe. If
right.
you really would believe the banana, you would be able to do it. It's actually how reasonable and how probably it is the simulation you do. And people say no, 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 but it's really what they believe. People can believe the craziest thing. It
Uh,
really doesn't matter if it's true or not, or if it makes sense. It only thing if they really believe that there is a tie in between this action, the banana, and actually the North Pole expedition. If they really actually have a simulation when they say, okay, I can see the
right.
the, the
And so
correlation, then it would work.
the way to do that is to make the banana more salient, right? It's to make the reason why, um, you're right. If there was a cultural approach to bananas, that they were truly sacred objects, you would create that salience. That is true. But you do need to get there through a certain sensory
Yeah, yeah,
mechanism.
yeah. That's a religion. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I give you some piece of waffle and say
Yeah.
this is
I,
the body.
I had a I had a cat that was deathly afraid of bananas. It would look at a banana and would run away. This is why I bring up the banana. There was a religion with the banana and that cat. Otto, this has been a great conversation. You're a fascinating person to speak with.
I'm basically, I think that the take home message really, and I mean, there are a lot of effects, and we not even talked about the cognitive system, because you see the unfortunately the default mode network. It shouldn't be called the default mode network. It was generated in the 90s by Mike Rakel from Wash U University. Why is it called default mode? So actually, just very briefly, 2 minutes. We have symbolically and the cognitive. How do we create simulation? There are actually three systems. One is this salience network, which is the anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is concerned with the here and now. So how do I feel? What is my thing? Am I hungry? Am I thing? But symbolically represented, and kind of react to that. Oh, I'm hungry, or I'm not hungry, right now. Then there is the second one, which is a little bit more, which is the default mode network, the thing, which is a, a simulation which takes things from your past, projects in the future, does daydreaming, say, okay, if this would have happened, I could have done this, or so on. Now, why is it called? And then there is the third one, the central executive, which is really m- actually symbolically representing all the other networks. So it symbolically represents the salience network, the default mode network, the brainstem, and so on. Which when I talk, okay, right now when we talk about the brain, we are in the central executive,
Of
because
course.
now we symbolically represent the default mode network. There is a word for it, the default mode network, and the salience network. So that actually controls everything else and actually generates it. But why do we call it the default mode network? And actually, it is related to the fact that our brain was designed for or regulatory organ was designed for a life of scarcity, where you have little resources, you need to eat a lot. That's why you go to the buffet, you eat, because too much food was never a problem in
Right.
the world. So, and also, and that's actually now much more relevant, information was always difficult to get. But
Hmm.
now that you have CNN 24 hours, people thought that it's a glut of information. Your brain was never designed for having a glut of information. It was always designed for scarcity of information.
Hmm.
That's why people listen to Fox News or CNN or internet and believe everything, because you know so we're using the kind of the brain of label for we have we have abundance. Now it was designed for scarcity, and that's a kind of evolution. But let me just make the last one, but default mode. So in 1,000 years ago, you were in the salience network, because every time you walked in the jungle or the thing, something could have happened. So you always was in the present. You didn't have time to kind of daydream and what's going to happen tomorrow and what happened yesterday. You were kind of like really locked in on this here and now, because you might have died every second, something. So, and that's actually was intended. So it was intended that you have the salience network, where you have interoception, then you kind of constantly kind of monitor what state you are in, what's your environment, smell the roses, and so on. And then was the kind of this network, this default mode, and was kind of, oh, if you are in the safety somewhere in your thing, then we can kind of think about tomorrow or the thing. But that was kind of an afterthought. Now now we're looking at today. Today, we obviously don't need to worry about anything, because we are constantly safe. So now we are spending so much time in the default mode network. in the what happened yesterday, what will happen, what is my career going, how do I sell my book, and so on, because you don't need to pay attention where you're sitting there,
Hmm.
because you are safe, you know that nothing's going to happen to you.
Right.
And that's why, so it was not meant to be a default mode network, but in our society of the 21st century, that's now become the default mode,
Yeah.
because we don't need to worry about the thing
Right.
now. So you have the default mode, which is kind of the daydreaming, and then you have the central executive, which is kind of the overall, and that's kind of important because people always do this, that there is like an inner observer. The inner observer is actually a central executive network, which now symbolically represents each of these other networks. So if you like daydream and then say, oh man, what I'm doing, I need to focus, that's actually where your central executive came in,
Hmm.
because now you realize that you were in the default mode network, that you need to activate the salience network, that so these three networks do different things, and the default mode network, unfortunately, has kind of a bad name, but that's
Well,
that's that's history.
it's
So
interesting.
anyway,
The I mean, I love that you have the neuroscience has language to describe these disparate networks. It's also, as an anthropologist, I listen to this and and it's very much your central executive network defining all of these things, and they all arose in one giant network called the brain, right? And you also state that it's so important to the culture and the environment that the organism lives in. I mean, our ancestors, you know, uh, lived in trees, lived in holes in trees, and spent 18 hours a day asleep, and only would go out under the cover of darkness to forage. Um, that no human that that with that like Homo sapiens, no Homo sapiens didn't have those three networks were operating at all times, because humans, Homo sapiens, had culture, right? Had interactions, had all three operating. It's just maybe we're
yeah, but
in a
that's
different
really the
out of
problem,
whack.
and that's actually the problem in with the brain, that all these, so the non-symbolic, the symbolic, the different, so the non-symbolic and the symbolic kind of operate at the same time. So you have emotions, which are
Hmm.
really on the in kind of in the in on the brainstem level, the non-symbolic, unconscious, and then you have the symbolic, the salience network, where you say, okay,
Right.
kind of kind of experiencing things, saying, oh, I'm
Well,
hungry. I'm
it's the reason why it's so the reason why it's so hard to talk about these things is that the language of the brain is not words. The language of the brain is part words, but it's mostly sensations and these other things that can only be
Well, which
felt,
which is really the brainstem. So
right?
that's actually the brainstem.
Sub.
But you see, the nice thing is, so this is actually the important point, that once you have non-symbolic representation, they can be parallel. So
Mhm.
emotions can be, you can be, or sensations and emotions can be, you can be afraid, you can be hungry, you can
Mhm.
be cold, all at the same time. Once you go into symbolic representation, the sequence of symbols has a meaning.
Mhm.
So at one time, it's parallel, it's serial. So you can only have one thought at a time, because the symbols, when they put
Correct.
together in a certain thing, has a certain temporal and structural sequence.
Mhm.
So the advantage of the non-symbolic representation is that it's all this, basically they are parallel.
Yeah.
The symbol, that's why you can only do either salience network or the default mode or the central executive. You cannot have them all three at the same time.
Mhm.
It's impossible, so you switch back and forth,
Well,
because it's based on symbols, and symbols,
Otto,
as how do you put symbols together.
I feel like we can talk for a long time, but I do need to wrap up. Real pleasure. If someone needs to find out more about Otto, where do they go?
Basically, they can read my papers. I mean, actually, a lot of this what we talked about, we published, and you mentioned Vaibhav Divatkar. I'm
Mhm.
working closely with him on these, kind of try to understand the brain. But just look up auto music, see some of the papers, and if they have any questions, I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
I love it.
I think it's important that people realize what the brain is all about. Actually, I always think that we should have in school, we should have a topic where we say kind of the manual for the brain, because
Mhm.
it's it's so important that you kind of understand yourself, how your regular system works.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure that eventually one day we're gonna have a topic where we just people in the school gonna learn about the regulatory system. So that's kind of my 2 cents to this.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scott Carney Investigates. It means a ton that you have come out to, well, get this far into the episode. If you are still here, if you found something at all useful in this conversation, please share this episode with a friend. That is how podcasts get seen in the world at large. As always, I release this first on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and then it becomes a YouTube video. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, thank you so much. This is Scott Carney Investigates.